On 16 September 1963, Malaysia came into existence and was made up of 14 states, including Singapore. The Union allowed Singapore to finally gain independence from the British. With no natural resources of its own, merger seemed critical to the long-term survival of Singapore. Singapore Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew believed this would result in greater and freer trade links, giving the small island state a larger market for its goods and services. Merger would also bolster Singapore's security, particularly in the battle against communists. Fears of a communist takeover of Singapore prompted Malaya's leader Tunku Abdul Rahman to consider a merger of Singapore with Malaya, despite the challenge it would pose to the racial balance in the merged entity. Singapore was majority Chinese, whilst Malaya was majority Malay. But the initial joy was short-lived. Ideological differences led to frequent political conflicts. In Singapore, the People's Action Party, or PAP government, believed in equality for all races and called for a Malaysian Malaysia. But the federal government firmly endorsed a pro-Malay agenda. This meant preferential treatment for Malays in the civil service, education, and in trade. There were differences over the setting up of a common market and taxes. The relationship was further challenged by what was deemed as a breaking of an agreement not to participate in the politics of each other's territory. Malaysia's dominant political party, the United Malays National Organisation, or UMNO, took part in Singapore's 1963 election under the banner of the Singapore Alliance Party, while the PAP took part in the 1964 federal elections in Malaysia. Large crowds attended its rallies. The PAP won only one seat by Devan Nair in Bangsa. Each side promoted its ideological vision for politics. The PAP's Malaysian Malaysia agenda versus the pro-Bumiputra agenda of the alliance. In July and September 1964, a series of deadly race riots took place in Singapore. Extremists were blamed for fanning racial tensions and instigating the riots. Social order slowly returned as local goodwill committees and politicians visited sensitive areas appealing for calm. Lee Kuan Yew continued to campaign for a democratic Malaysian Malaysia with equal rights and opportunities for all citizens. The PAP was one of the prime movers of the Malaysian Solidarity Convention in May 1965, seen by many UMNO members as a Chinese-led conspiracy, challenging the rights of Malays and a plot against the federal government.
We have not the slightest intention of seceding and obliging their ultras and leaving our friends, our fellow countrymen, fellow Malaysians to the tender mercies of the ultras.
Tunku Abdul Rahman became convinced that separation was the only way to resolve the differences without further bloodshed. The formal announcement was made in a national broadcast on the 9th of August.
For some time, there have been differences between the central government and the leaders of the Singapore state government. And these differences take so many forms and are of so many kinds that it has not been possible to resolve them. And so we decided that we must part company.
You know, every time we look back on this moment when we signed this agreement which severed Singapore from Malaysia, it will be a moment of anguish. I mean, for me, it is a moment of anguish because all my life I had believed in merger and the unity of these two territories.
In one fell swoop, the years toiled to establish a united Malaysia were lost. Singapore was on its own. The future was grim, with no defense and security of its own and no economic hinterland to fall back on. The moment of anguish was something the newly independent nation had to recover from. The first generation leadership had little time to tarry. It had to create jobs, develop better homes, and provide education for a growing population.